Thank you, Tricia. Amazing intro. So thank you so much for that. I also want to just have a quick shout out to Glenn, who came before me. I don't think the recruitment experience is all that great on the whole, and we need a lot more people like Glenn helping our future generations make sure that they have good fits with the right company. So yeah, great presentation. So my name's Ben. I want to start with a poll, if that's okay, folks. We're in the middle of a crisis, a pandemic crisis, and I'm interested in what you think the future scenario will be as we emerge from this. There's four scenarios. One is growth, where the economic system is saved at all costs, but it leads to slow and unequal growth, and our frontline heroes are forgotten. The second is constraint, based around human solidarity and an ongoing willingness to minimize infection spikes. And there's also an expansion of safety nets through universal basic income. The third is collapse, where the virus keeps coming back and causes political tensions and gives rise to societal divisions and protests. And the last one is transform. Society is reorganized and reordered, the economic systems are reimagined, and our networked world becomes more cohesive, where people plug into it with a win-win mindset. So interested to see what your views are. So please vote. Okay. I don't know where we see the results, folks. So we basically didn't test this over lunchtime. So maybe it appears in your screens, but I can't see what the results were. But anyway, it's you can have a chat amongst yourselves within the chat. I think that you know, for me, diversity changes minds. Is kind of really about diversity of thought, but also, secondly, about how our thinking adapts to the world around us. And you might have heard about cognitive diversity. You might be familiar with you know, how it improves teamwork, innovation, and problem-solving capabilities. But the problem with this sometimes is that it starts from a starting point which is assumed to be correct, that how we live, learn, work, and consume is still fit for purpose. But cognitive diversity can help us zoom out, and we can observe the world which we've created, these conditions which ultimately shapes the way that we think. And so one way of looking at the future is we recognize that systems need to change. So do we keep solving the same problems by marching further up an increasingly steep hill, or do we look for better ones to solve? And so now I can see the results, which are great. So I think that that's a really hopeful future, that actually now might be the opportunity for kind of governments and us to actually get round a new way of living, and quite good that actually collapse is so far down as well. But if you hold on to some of those scenarios as we go through this, you'll understand kind of why I asked this question to start with. So, all right, get rid of the poll. So this presentation is about the brain and human evolution. You'll learn little snapshots about it. I also want to talk about the challenges which we face today through the lens of how we think, and also finally just about what the opportunities are for leaders going into the 21st century. And so my story, it's kind of been a little bit like mainstream hasn't worked for me. I always found myself traveling at different speeds or in other directions altogether. And in some ways, my childhood explains a little bit about this. it was fairly insecure. I was born into a family with no father, didn't have much money, and there was a bunch of health problems. And so what I needed really was life skills, and school and our education system didn't give us these. It didn't teach me how to learn either, or inspire me for the world of work. But I was lucky, you know, I wasn't particularly employable when I was 18, but I managed to figure stuff out, and I managed to find diverse people, diverse perspectives to help me. I also embraced variety, and my career went broad as well. So I ended up working at the Financial Times between 2007 2016, during which time the iPhone was launched. We had the financial crash, and then the austerity years. And so I learned a lot. But when I left there, I was quite disillusioned with our economic story, but also the business models which underpin social media and advertising. They just didn't seem right. So I changed direction, and I changed environments altogether, and I moved into workplace automation and information management. But there, I found myself a bit bored about efficiency and about how technology was just about replacing people. And so I kind of gravitated towards the question, what are we going to do with people in the future? And so, you know, during that kind of questioning period, I felt my world kind of closing in on me, becoming a little bit more narrow. And ultimately, this led to a breakdown of sorts and a diagnosis of ADHD only a few years ago. And so it's that experience really which shapes my next phase of my life. And I want to imagine better ways of learning and working, and help young people go through these complex systems which aren't really fit for purpose now. So hopefully that's the kind of context piece to my thinking. And so when it comes to the kind of big question, when I say big question, I'm sure I'm not the only person that wonders this. How on earth have humans come to colonize every corner of the planet? And, you know, there's several reasons for it. A lot of the times we think about strength and competition, but you know, I think that's misleading. I think brain power, you know, innovation and teamwork are incredibly important too. And so, you know, as our brains developed, we formed tribes and developed culture. And this is a kind of product of thinking and social learning. And language and creativity weaves through these, and we are bonded together by shared stories. And this wisdom's passed down through the generations, and it creates a unique hallmark of humans, which is complexity and our ability to generate it. And so when we talk about complexity, you know, there's nothing more complex in the universe than the human brain. And there's billions of different versions of them. You know, and it's an astonishing piece of kit, 86 billion neurons, which are connected to 10,000 others. And these communicate messages. And these go via synapses. And there's 1,000 trillion of those. I think that's the right number of zeros. It might not be, though. It might be more than that. And this allows us to kind of think, to make choices and interact with the world. On top of this, we've also got the complexity of neurochemicals, and we reckon that there's maybe about 100 plus, but science can only record accurately 4 of these. But they're really important because they help us to respond to the external environment. They control pain, mood, our feelings. And so this is really, really important. So what I'm trying to stress here is that we don't know an awful lot about our brain. And so the idea of a normal brain is just a myth, you know, one single way of thinking. You know, every trauma, every person, every environment, every new idea rewires our brains in some way. And there's one mystery. We can't explain consciousness with our scientific models of understanding the world. So if we can't understand what kind of goes on inside our minds, why are we so certain about what goes on everywhere else? You know, and our minds shape our world through institutions, technologies, and systems, which in turn shape how we think, because they change the nature of what we find. And so a man with a hammer sees everything like it's a nail. But is that the full story? And so why are there so many paradoxes? And I list a few here as an example. We've never had access to information like today, but we seem less able to use it wisely. We've never been better connected to each other, but have never been isolated either. And we're materially wealthy and abundant, but we're depressed with it. So these seem like examples of demi-truths that they don't reveal the whole picture. And so where do we look for the other half? And so what do you see in this image? You know, this was an image, or similar to an image, which was shown to a group of Japanese and American citizens, both shown the same image, and they saw very different things. And so when the Americans were asked, what do you see? They talked about the fish, the size, the color. When the Japanese were asked, they talked about the whole picture. So they talked about the plants, the rocks, the flow, and the fish. And so kind of one of the difference really was, one was kind of processing details or objects, and the other one was seeing the kind of whole picture, the context. And so Japanese are interdependent as a culture, and Americans are very individualistic. And so we're genetically very similar, but the manufactured lens through culture makes us see the world very, very differently. And so this is an example of one of the differences between our hemispheres. So the processing of small details versus the overall shape, the bigger picture. This is an example of how our brain hemispheres differ. And there's a neuroscientist, philosopher, and author called Ian McGilchrist, and he argues in the West, we view the world very differently to almost every other culture. And so his work explores brain damage and stroke victims, split brain operations, which were carried out some time ago, as well as philosophical ideas, which we in the West have adopted and shape our thinking. So what do we know about the brain hemispheres? Well, we know that the right controls the left, and then vice versa. So that begs the question, why are 90% of us right-handed? And why do mothers hold their babies' heads to their left? We know that the brain hemispheres evolve in different rates. So it starts with the right, then goes to the left, and then the right into adulthood. Why is that? And so what does this reveal about how we should think? Because in nature, there's always a reason for the way things develop. And so why are our hemispheres asymmetrical? And why are they just different in every particular way? So different white matter, different size, different weight, different neurochemicals, different types of connections. And the right has a lot more connections as well. So just fundamentally, they're different on every level. And when a brain is all about connections, isn't it weird that it's actually divided in the first place? And it's connected through a bunch of fibers called the corpus callosum. There's 200 million of them. But why are 75% of those inhibitory, which means that they shut down the other hemisphere from seeing what the other one is doing? So there was popular psychology, which probably ruined these inquiries going back to the 70s and 80s. They kind of generalized a lot about what our hemispheres did. They suggested that the left was all about the male all about reason, all about language, and the right was all about emotion, female, and music. And whilst there's nothing absolute with how our brains function, there are distinct differences. And both hemispheres are involved in pretty much every process, but we also know that when it comes to emotions, the right is more emotionally receptive. But then the particular emotion, which maps to one particular hemisphere the most, is anger to the left. So the subtle differences. And so according to Ian McGilchrist, we were just simply asking the wrong question back in the 70s and 80s. It wasn't what they did, but it was how they did it. And so we moved to the savannah. And this is where we spent 99.9% of our human condition, in tribes, outdoors. And so it's important to understand actually how our brains work. And I want to do this through the lens of attention. Why? Because it's our primary resource for engaging with the world, and actually the nature of attention changes what we find. But also I supposedly have a attention deficit. So I was interested actually in was this another oversimplification, if you like. So let's look at attention. And so if you think of attention in just broadly two different types. So the right hemisphere is wary of predators. The left seeks prey. So the right is broad, open, and sustains. The left is narrow and fixed. Whilst the right allows us to explore, the left actually allows us to find food, to grasp, and to build tools. So the right hemisphere is a bit more like our territory, and I would say that the left is more like our map. And the left thinks very much in binary terms. Is it food or is it an enemy? Yes or no? And it cares about details, and it cares about what it knows so it can categorize for next time, so it can make quicker and quicker decisions. And as we developed as human beings, we developed culture and more cooperation. And so we started understanding people better. And we became compassionate and had emotional connections to those around us and our environment. And then at the same time, the left enabled us to control and manipulate people and our environment for self-interest. Now, our brain evolved to have both of these. And so we need both of them, but it's really important to keep them in balance. And so then we fast forward to today. The world which we have created is just so different to where we evolved. And, it's not without problems, some fantastic things. But one of the big problems is we've had almost an unchecked capacity to grasp, to extract, manipulate, and accumulate from our environment. And it's heaped misery on the living world. And this comes back to Ian's hypothesis that in the West in particular, we've created a world in the ideals of the left hemisphere. And the consequences of this is that we're acting as if we've got right hemisphere brain damage. So let's overlay this hypothesis on the key parts of humanity, which I introduced at the beginning. So the left hemisphere, if you like, helps us to use the world. And so what we think about, everything's kind of mechanical, everything's driven by a process. And so when we talk about complexity, and Margaret talked about this in a talk earlier on, complexity is really in the form of complicated systems. So technical systems which allow us to trade resources and manage resources. And so cognitively, what we do, we encourage people to think in a kind of bureaucratic lens. So it's very kind of linear, it's very analytical. Actually, how do we kind of understand all of this data which we're generating? Because data and utility are the kind of key things, and efficiency as well, that the left looks out for. When it comes to cooperation, this is a fundamental part of how we got here. But actually what we're doing, we're creating all this interdependency, and we're plugging in people with a zero-sum mentality. And so, this is why it's so chaotic on the internet. Actually, we're competing at all costs. And it just doesn't make sense. The only way that we actually cooperate is if there's a financial transactional benefit to it. And so then when we come to culture, the left likes sameness. So it likes to generalize and make everything popular. It also likes to impose. And so we get all culture imposed to us through screens. We don't actually live it. And everything just becomes commoditized. So yeah, culture just becomes very samey. And so what does a left hemisphere world look and feel like? Well, I think if you look around, you can understand and see it everywhere. So what the left hemisphere likes to do is to categorize and sort and discard. And people eventually have been put into this process. And so, this kind of really happened on steroids, really, from the industrial age, where we're all just shoved into factories. And this kind of very kind of linear box-like category thing basically just became our lives. So, we're kind of queued and stacked from birth, in school every day, in our work, in our suburban streets, our food, is outrageous, but, is part of the same problem. Our supermarkets, even our leisure time, and even our friends, everything's just stacked and categorized. And, eventually when we get to, when we become ill, we don't have a particularly graceful end from the world either. So this quote really resonated with me. Human beings aren't designed for this world, and it's making us ill. And there's 297 categories of mental illness in the world. So I think the question is, who isn't ill and why aren't they ill? Because actually depression is a byproduct of civilization. And the reason why we have addiction is because there's an economic value to it. And so what other things do we get with this type of society? Well, we get polarization, because everything is reduced to binary, in or out, left or right, and so on. And so we become entrenched in that thinking. But there's other things as well. We become paranoid. The reason we become paranoid is because our left hemisphere doesn't know what the right hemisphere does. So it manifests that into the real world through surveillance and cameras everywhere. So we're just kind of monitoring each other. And ultimately, this is leading to a breakdown of truth and trust. So this is really kind of putting societal cohesion on the line unless we change our thinking. So where next? As I've probably showed in that last slide, there is no such thing in nature as a straight line. But we're wedded to this idea that actually, infinite growth is possible, even though we have planetary boundaries. So the longer we stick to this line, the further we become from the arc of life. And this kind of quote links back to the Savannah times. We still got the emotional network from that era, but we've got medieval institutions, and now we've got godlike technology, which can pretty much wipe out the whole of civilization. So we need an upgrade in our wisdom, but we need it quick, because if you look through all of civilizations which came before us, all powerful ones, one of the questions I had at the beginning for the poll was collapse. Every civilization before us has collapsed, and history reveals the common threads: environmental destruction, resource depletion, rising inequality, out of control complexity, and bureaucratic overreach. They seem like the same things which are happening now. So this begs the question, where next? And it comes back to our thinking. Well, it comes back to a lot of things, but I'm trying to say that I find it helpful looking through the lens of how our brain hemispheres interpret the world. So the right helps us understand the world. It's very different to the left hemisphere, but we need both. We tend to overcompensate as human beings, but actually we do really need both. And so complexity, the right helps us to has more of a naturalistic lens to complement the mechanistic lens. From a cognitive point of view, we need more creativity, and creativity and imagination come from our right hemispheres. But it's also holistic. It allows us to think simultaneously multiple problems, because the challenges which we've got today are multi-layered. And so the kind of shape of the problems require a different shape of solution, if you like. And the right hemisphere understands relationships. And if we need to cooperate, we need to understand what other people feel, their perspectives, and kind of resonate with them on a human level. And then culture. The right hemisphere understands differences. It understands individual stories, understands cultural diversity. We need all of these to actually understand what on earth is happening on our planet right now. And so leadership in the 21st century, I've likened it to being stuck in a hall of mirrors. And actually, the longer we keep thinking, using the same thinking to solve the problems which were actually created by the thinking in the first place, we'll just end up being forever trapped. And so a couple of examples of this, we're trapped by the system, first of all. So the system's actually killing us, but we have to participate in it to survive. So that's a problem, but we're all doing that. But then the left hemisphere is riddled with biases. It's overconfident. It ignores new information. It denies when it's wrong, and it doubles down on certainty. And then coming back to Ian's point, when we think about how with language, the right hemisphere understands implicit language, understands the body, emotion, non-facial expression, irony, humor, but it doesn't have speech. So the left hemisphere has speech. It has explicit instructions and language. So in today's digital age and information overwhelm era, it dominates the language space, and so the right doesn't get heard. And so thinking about the future, what does this mean for leaders looking forward? And there aren't many easy takeaways, but one example is the 20th century was really about, okay, what we knew. And it was very much kind of power over people. And choices and decisions were made for people, but actually their lives were getting materially better. But actually now that they're not, I think people don't want to be cogs anymore. And they want a say in the future, if you like. And so your role as leader really is how do we create more opportunities to participate at all levels in discussion, in conversation, hearing different perspectives. And so the nature of leadership, I think, then becomes about what we don't know and being comfortable to say that, and being comfortable to explore and go on a journey with your colleagues. It really comes about service to others and seeing the bigger picture. And so then number two is we kind of think about different types of cognitive diversity in a very narrow sense. So our education system really kind of educates people to think in a very, very narrow way, which leans slightly to the left hemisphere. It's all about organization. It's all about repetition. It's all about sitting still and working alone. But we need a lot more than that in the future to solve our problems. Whoops. So the left hemisphere, if you like, makes things, it kind of narrows down to certainty. So it makes things more predictable. So we need more technicians. We need to define better maps. We need better rules. But that has a limitation. because actually we're operating in a really narrow space. So this is why we're not productive. And so what we need to do really is open our minds to new possibilities, new business models, new ways of working. And this is what COVID-19 is allowing us to explore. So to be productive, we kind of need to be creative, first of all. And I think that what we're doing from a work point of view too often is very narrow and bureaucratic. So we're spending more and more time executing simple transactions when actually all around us resources are depleting. So we're spending more time executing on a smaller share of the pie. So we really need to be creative, I see, to actually have a sustainable economy in the future. And so then I just want to have just a very quick link to my sort of understanding of cognitive diversity. And I'm just using just my example very quickly. So an ADHD specialist likened ADHD to having a high performance engine, but with bicycle brakes. So you can see the difference between the two. I quite like fast thinking, fluid thinking, being in the moment, pattern matching, finding connections. And it takes me a little bit longer to slow down. But actually in the future, rather than trying to have a set way of thinking, I think the 20th century was really about focusing on people's weaknesses. And I think the 21st century really is, how do we all play to our strengths? And the way that we cure people now is we say, if people have got a fast mind, they've got lots of energy, we drug them with amphetamines from the age of 6. And I don't think that that's the only way. I think that people get stimulation in other ways, through things having meaning, importance, and interest. So I think we can be a lot smarter in how we actually motivate young people in the classroom, but also in the workplace. And I think that will benefit the productivity and outputs. And so when we talk about motivation and interest, this kind of links back to my childhood. And the postcode I was born into, I had a life expectancy of 6 or 7 years less than some of my mates. So my time on this planet is shorter than everybody else. And so that kind of makes me think about, okay, well, I've got a short time on this planet. I want to make sure that what I do has meaning. I want to be connected to the value, to people that I'm actually helping. And so that's kind of really shaped my next phase of my life. And then final thought, this is really about you as leaders, just finding time to do very small gestures which make a huge difference. So many of us are kind of judged by how we should be, whatever normal is. And we get disorders not because our brains are defective, it's because we're told that our brains are stupid and we believe it. But actually we need to stop this, because actually it's really quite damaging for people. And beyond how we think or cognitive diversity, how we think really is shaped by insecurity and poverty. And there's 4 million kids in the UK growing up in poverty, 6th richest country in the world. They need a voice, and we need them to come on a journey with us. And so we need to try and make time as leaders to ask them, what is their story? How is power operating in their lives? These rebels have interesting things to say and really important contributions to make in our future. So it would be great if you could spend the time to make these small gestures. Honestly, it really makes a big difference. So that's all from me. Sorry I overran by a few minutes, but thank you. And if you want to reach out, please do so. Here are my details.
Ben, thank you so much. I have to say, the chat is alive with comments, which I can't wait for you to read afterwards. And there's some fantastic questions coming through as well, which I am so excited to share with you. The first question, which I think is a bit of a yes or no question, notwithstanding the fact this may not be within your power, but Maria Banks says, Ben, can you please take your presentation to number 10?
Yes, after lockdown.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. We start with that one then. Look, there's 1,000 things I want to say to you, and I've just written down pages and pages of notes as you were talking about all of the different themes that come up for me. And unlike Jimmy, who was so generous earlier and didn't ask his own question first, even though there are questions on the chat here, I am going to ask my own question first, because I think that there is such a strong relationship between what I want to talk about tomorrow, talking about climate change and talking about sustainability and how we build that into strategies for leaders, and everything you've just said, because you talked about the commoditization of culture. You talk about leaders needing to think differently and think outside the box, because our economic structure is driving us into something that is we're incompatible with as a planet. Our species is incompatible with it. How can we use what you've told us about cognitive diversity to better understand why people engage with that climate story in such extreme different ways?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. So I'll probably just touch on a couple of things. I think that we all respond to information in very different ways, and some people just on one level will be overwhelmed by the whole idea of climate change. Other people will be empowered. The kind of the nature of the message is also important. So if people are not responding to facts and stats, then they don't need more facts and stats. So what do they need? And I think one massively important thing is how do we show them another way? And it's kind of not imposing. It's not imposing what the left hemisphere wants on other people, but actually, if we can expose people to nature, to people, to meaningful encounters, actually and this comes back to Gail's talk earlier on, actually kind of the feelings and emotions actually change how you think. So some people just process it very, very differently. But yeah, I'm a kind of really big fan of how do we be more human, and how do we kind of get back to how we evolved, and that was being in amongst nature. And then once you see the beauty of nature, see the beauty of people and the diversity of people, I think that is a big impact. So I think we've had all of the kind of facts and the kind of damage now. It's kind of about experience, really. I don't know.
That's really brilliant. I love that. I've written some things down. I'm actually going to use that in my work. Thank you. I've got a question from Adrian. This is fascinating, he says. So I'm hearing that we really need to be focusing more on the right hemisphere characteristics if we're going to successfully tackle the major complex challenges the world is facing in the 21st century. Some people are putting great faith in the growth of AI to aid us solving those challenges. Have you thought about this? I'm not an AI expert, but I'm guessing it probably functions in a more of a left hemisphere way.
Yeah, it does. Interestingly, I'll touch on AI. Ian McGilchrist, and I would like to just mention his work. So he's the author of The Master and His Emissary, and then the subtitle is The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. It's a really interesting book. It's quite heavy duty, but really interesting. But actually, he refers to artificial intelligence as artificial stupidity. That actually, in some ways, because the right hemisphere has been suppressed, the left hemisphere has basically crowded out everything which is going on. So a bit like the kind of man with a hammer only sees nails. So we only see data and things to kind of optimize and tinker and whatnot. So I think AI will be hugely important, and it's already affecting our lives. But to actually use it wisely, we really need to upgrade our right hemisphere capabilities. So we kind of really need to kind of understand more holistically what problems we're solving, and actually what are the unintended consequences as well, because we're rushing to solve problems at breakneck speed without thinking about the consequences further down the line. And we're just highly interdependent. We've got fragile systems, all the stuff which Margaret was talking about earlier on. And all we're doing is basically getting more and more into our narrow bunkers. So basically going back to the kind of point two at the end, for Adrian, it's how do we kind of think about the kind of extremes, because that kind of middle bit, that narrow bit, is what machines will do. So we need kind of more technical specialists to understand our systems. So we need more coders, we need better AI, but we also need people who are compassionate, who understand living systems, who understand how people relate to one another, understand what problems we actually need to solve. So we kind of need a better harmony of both. So I think I don't want us to disown all of the kind of STEM stuff. No, I'm not saying that at all. I just think that we need to kind of really be conscious about what our right hemisphere has to offer.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I mean, just thinking about that kind of left right, someone has posted a question anonymously saying, great presentation, really enjoyed it. Is each individual predisposed to thinking of exploiting versus understanding the world, or are we a mix mash of both, and so sometimes conflicted and therefore confused?
I think we've probably got a bit of everything. So there are definitely people who are kind of more naturally lean one way. So when I talk about Ferrari engine versus bicycle brakes, that doesn't really tell the whole picture, because my brakes are perfectly fine. I can hyper focus, I can concentrate, but I need the motivation to do so, because my motivation network is suppressed. So I need high stimulus. That's why we like to kind of thrill seek or kind of do things which are quite dangerous, because actually that's like a normal like pleasure feeling, if you like. So actually, I am more right leaning, but actually I feel a better person when I've kind of got both of them in harmony. So I kind of need the simulation, but I also need the kind of calmness. I love being creative and social and playful, but I like kind of serious productivity as well. So for me, I just kind of get at that harmony in slightly different ways. But we're definitely, some people, basically, we've created systems, and a lot of this is really shaped through culture. And so we've created systems where we only think about numbers, we only think about financial transactions. All of our life is shaped through a calendar, so everything's like a 15-minute or a half an hour block of time. And so it's really difficult not to kind of think in a left hemisphere way. It really takes quite a lot of effort. So a lot of people have just adapted to this better than others. But 297 categories of mental illness, at what point are we going to say that the starting point, what is normal, because that seems mad.
Yeah. Tony's asked a question which is very, very broad, but I think that people are just interested in your view because you're such a captivating speaker. So I will ask it. What do you feel is the key role of a leader?
I did talk about service. I think one of my biggest barriers has always been people misunderstanding me, and I kind of feel that because I get from A to B slightly differently, I kind of need to always explain it. And so actually leaders who understand different characters, understand the kind of nuance of individuals, and kind of really, appreciate when actually they're not doing something wrong. It's just like maybe a misunderstanding. And so actually I've always got on with leaders who really went out of their way to get to know me, and leaders who, and to talk about the kind of Ferrari engine and the brakes, some days I will be right up there and other days I'll be down there. And so actually being emotionally receptive to what states individuals are is kind of really, really important. So, you know, we're in an era where there's just scale, where actually a lot of leaders just can't know people. But I say kind of go back to our kind of slightly more tribal roots, where we actually have groups of small groups of people who really understand each other. And if we've got that, people are more engaged, they're happier, you know, kind of well-being is better, and people are more productive, more creative. And so kind of, I really think that relationships are key for it.
I agree entirely. I think we are almost out of time. There's just a few things that came up. I wanted to just let you know that somebody wrote a comment about the poll at the end of when you put that up, saying that we are clearly and obviously a hopeful and optimistic group, which I thought that was great. Someone else has made a comment about, you know, what is not just the role of leaders, but what's the role of actual people in the context of everything that you've told us. I wrote down comments about people who'd said things around the nature of attention, truth and trust, about upgrading our wisdom, all the things that you said. So it has been, I mean, I can't wait for you to read the chat. You're going to love all the comments. There's so much in there that people have said. You've really, really, really inspired absolutely everybody, I think, with your talk.
Lovely.
So we are, well, thank you. Let me just let you have the final word before I introduce the next act.
That sounds amazing. So I'm looking forward to dialing into the chat, and then we've got a great speaker next as well. So I know this kind of dovetails really nicely with what I've talked about. So looking forward to hearing about Rob as well.